official title at the time of this.
In 2015, I was the lead detective on this case for the Weld County Sheriff's Office in Colorado. This case first got started with a woman getting in touch with the All Police Department and wanting to report her daughter as missing.
I think something really bad happened.
The woman's name is Vonda Holt. Her daughter's name is Tara Lewandowski. Vonda thinks her daughter may be dead.
You're allowing us to search your premises.
Officers do a welfare check at the residence where Tara lived.
They went out to the house to see if she was there and talked to the folks that were on scene there.
They've encountered two roommates who also say they have no idea where she is.
I haven't seen her since we dropped her off at the
The roommates report that this girl, Tara, believed she was developing pneumonia. She had a terrible cough.
So they took her into Greeley and dropped her off at an urgent care.
The roommates say that she never returned. DJ Meyer is the homeowner, and he has a girlfriend, Crystal, who lives with him. He invites the officers in, and they look around in the place.
And what's in here?
They look around. They find nothing of real interest. They see nothing out of place, no evidence of a struggle or a fight. And they find no Tara. She is now a missing person.
And that starts the process going towards looking for what happened to Tara.
Detective Anderson and Detective Boyle need to find this girl.
We dove in and we did an interview with Vonda.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your daughter, ma'am?
I really felt like she'd been murdered. I was really afraid they were going to think I was nuts.
I wanted to learn more about Tara and her history.
Tara was a really happy child. She was extremely smart.
She had a lot of love and a lot of compassion to give. She always wanted to be a vet. And that was before her dreams got crashed by a car accident.
She had multiple surgeries out of that one accident.
It changed the whole trajectory of her life. She got hooked on pain pills. She was always in pain. She was at a rehab. One of the ladies in there was Crystal. They were friends.
Crystal offers Tara a place to stay. Crystal Griffin is the girlfriend of DJ Meyer, the homeowner. So DJ Meyer is in fact Daniel Meyer, a respected member of the community and a respected member of the city council.
She was on disability, and they were going to rent her the room for $100 a month. She thought it was a great opportunity.
Tara moved into this house with DJ Meyer and Crystal Griffin.
When's the last time you actually spoke to Tara?
And then one night, Tara texts Vonda saying, "Stay by your phone, something might happen." And Vonda gets the text the next morning at around 5 in the morning when she's getting ready for work.
When I woke up, I tried to reach her and I couldn't get a hold of her. Tara had a pain specialist appointment that day. And so I called and I said, "Vonda, she didn't show up."
Vonda said she got this weird feeling come over her and she thought something bad happened and she called 911.
The mother explains that Tara has a dog that never leaves her side, a black Chihuahua whose name is Diablo.
According to Vonda, she was very, very attached to her dog, Diablo.
Tara never went anywhere without her dog. It didn't matter if she went to the doctor, it didn't matter if she went to the store. That was her sidekick, period.
The dog is also missing. It's a total mystery. However, they are fortunate that someone was about to make a discovery.
There was a rancher that called in to law enforcement and said, "Hey, I found this dog a few days ago."
A farmer sees a small black chihuahua wandering around on the side of the road near the Pawnee grasslands, and he thinks he's going to rescue this creature. At the same time, Vonda posted a photograph of her daughter and the dog on Facebook. The farmer sees the posting and decides he's got that dog. So he calls the Weld County Sheriff's Department to report this.
I went out to that rancher's house and took a couple photos of the dog. And then I sent those back to Vonda, and she confirmed that that was Tara's dog, Diablo.
This is a very promising event. We've solved one part of this mystery. Now we need to solve the other part. Where is Tara? They search far and wide around the Pawnee grasslands where the dog was discovered.
We even had State Patrol fly over looking for mounds or fresh dirt, like a grave.
Those first few days, it was pretty extensive, but we just weren't finding anything. We were needing an additional lead to follow up on.
So they bring in Tara Lewandowski's roommate, DJ Meyer, as to knowledge of her disappearance.
Well, what I want to talk to you about is Tara.
Okay.
Yeah.
I dropped her off at urgent care. You know, and we dropped her off, and she stood out.
Who's we?
Me and Crystal.
Crystal?
My girlfriend. Her last name was Griffin.
DJ Meyer is cooperative and helpful. He says since she didn't drive, she asked him for a ride to an Emergicare in Greeley, Colorado, a short distance away. He then says they tell her when they drop her off, "We're going to go get lunch with my grandmother, and we'll be back in about an hour and pick you up."
Well, when we went back to urgent care, she never checked in.
I said, I don't know where she's at. I took her to the doctor and I haven't seen her since.
They asked him, "So what do you think happened to her?"
DJ said she's probably downtown looking for her drug dealer.
I think a guy by the name of Cheech. I don't know his last name. I don't know what he does. I know he hangs out at Lincoln Park.
He believes that instead of going into the Emergicare, she went and found Cheech and fell off the wagon. Anderson and Boyle have been looking for another place to go besides DJ, and he's just provided it. Who is Cheech, and where is he right now? Detectives Anderson and Boyle have received a tip from Tara Lewandowski's roommate, DJ Meyer. He says she may have made contact with a drug dealer he knows as Cheech.
When he provided that information, we tried to track down that drug dealer, Cheech.
It's a street name. Every agency has these lists of names, monikers, gang members, sex offenders. You name it, we've got a list.
I had recently been undercover for the drug task force, so I called them, and nobody had ever heard of Cheech.
So they decide that this is nonsense. They're going to rule it out. But the problem they have at the moment is they don't have a body. They don't have a crime scene. They know that Tara texted her mother and said something bad might happen tonight in DJ's house. That's all they have. So you have to keep at it.
She didn't have a phone at that time. She had a tablet that she was using, so she mainly texted.
There was no tracking her cell phone because she didn't have one.
So that's another strike against them. But then, 2 weeks in, their detectives' luck changes. A man walks into Weld County Sheriff's Department. He says his name is Richard, and he has a sister whose name is Crystal Griffin, DJ's girlfriend and former roommate of our missing person. Richard says, my sister knows something about this.
He said that at some point in the couple weeks following the homicide, she had disclosed to him that she had been in the house when Tara had been murdered.
This is the type of tip that convinces you that there is a God. We have a focus now. If you're going to tell anybody about a bad thing, you're going to tell blood before you tell a stranger. They bring in Crystal Griffin and take her back to an interrogation room.
She started telling us the story. It was really hard to believe her because it was really so far-fetched.
So, tell us a little about DJ.
DJ is kind of living a double life.
Crystal begins her statement by saying that my boyfriend DJ, you don't really know who he is. He's a member of the city council, yeah, he is. But he's also the enforcer of a motorcycle gang called the 21 Biker Club. Anderson and Boyle have never heard of that. What is that? Well, it's this group of people. They're all friends, and they all belong to this gang. What do they ride? Well, they don't have motorcycles. What? It's a biker gang, but they don't have motorcycles.
She explained to us that this group was trying to be some sort of gang.
She said they were infatuated with knives and weapons, stabbing pillows and trees.
There we go.
She kind of laid out the hierarchy a little bit of the group. Tom Vassell was Mike Vassell's father, and he was supposedly the president of this group. Mike Vassell would have been the second in charge. DJ Meyer was supposedly the enforcer of the group. Chad Eiler was a friend of the group. Carly Hanchett was Mike's girlfriend. And then Carly's brother, Scott Hanchett.
Except for Tom. DJ was the oldest one at that time, and I think he was over 30, and all the way down to Carly, who was 17.
She also said Tom Vassell had been part of some sort of biker gang when he was back in New York.
Supposedly, he was a former Hells Angel.
I think he maybe worked on bikes for them, but not a full patch member or anything. And I think that history probably intrigued his son Mike and the rest.
There's some seriously scary stuff.
Crystal disclosed that there had been some sort of an issue in the house and that everybody else had decided to kill Tara upstairs in Tara's bedroom. She said that during that time frame, she had gone into a downstairs bedroom and never went upstairs to see what was going on. And then she said that afterwards, she had been with them when they loaded Tara's body up and took it to dump it. She was not able to give us a specific location on where they had dumped the body.
Both detectives understand this story is bizarre, but they also know there is a house where Crystal says this crime occurred. Based on her information, they obtain a search warrant for the house, which is owned by DJ.
There was a lot of cleaning products out in the kitchen. If I remember right, there was a bottle just labeled bleach. It seemed a little odd.
They're looking for evidence of death in this house, primarily blood evidence in a place that is thought to be a violent crime scene. They use a technique called luminol. Luminol is a chemical that will cause human blood to fluoresce in darkness. They go into the room where Tara lived, and they luminol the walls, the ceiling. There is no blood in this room where Crystal says she was killed. They check the other rooms, and they find nothing. There is no evidence of blood in this house. Did they clean up? Or Crystal's story isn't true? folks. Henderson goes outside, and he sees two people next door. He goes over and introduces himself, shows him a bed, and says, anything unusual here in the last few days? Oh, yeah. Oh, what was that? Well, DJ, the guy that lives there, we saw him digging a hole in the backyard, and he had something wrapped up in a blanket. They say, we thought he was digging a grave. Really? They go check the backyard. They do find what appears to be a grave and freshly turned earth.
They ended up excavating what appeared to be a fresh gravesite.
And then it happened.
There's something here.
I can't remember who dug it up, but they said there's bones.
They begin looking at this gravesite. They find bones. But there's a problem. They're not human. They're a dog, a buried dog. They know this is not Tara's dog because they have Tara's dog. It's with the mom. So where are they now? No body, no crime scene. Crystal's story doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Then she has a relationship with DJ. What if she's just mad at him and wants to give him up for a disappearance and a homicide? It's time to talk to her again. Crystal said in her initial statement, she was forced to accompany this group as they disposed of the remains. Okay, Crystal, take us to the body. They put her in a car and they drive north toward Wyoming.
We spent a lot of hours in the car trying to get her to remember things that she had seen when Tara's body was dumped.
She said it was dark, it was late at night. I'm not sure, but there was water running nearby.
She took us right over the Wyoming border. She would show us different things that she thought looked familiar, but it was never the right place.
So now Crystal has another problem with her story. The body isn't in the area where she says it was. So has Crystal just invented this whole thing? What's going on?
In the car, we ended up trying to gather as much information from her verbally to at least paint a picture of what had happened with Tara. Crystal's story was that Tara had had some sort of a disagreement or an argument with Carly the night before. And it was all over a stereo that was too loud. Tara had said something that made the group think that she had disrespected Carly.
What does she think she is anyway? They're just so messed up.
Being that Carly was dating Mike, who was the second in charge of this gang, they had to do something about it.
She has been disrespected, and it's a meaningful thing in the biker world, and it's a death penalty offense. Even though these people have no idea what the biker world is all about, only what they've heard or seen in the movies. According to Crystal, because of the rules of the gang, the enforcer is called upon to carry it out, and that is DJ, the owner of the house.
We were wondering if she was even being truthful about a lot of it. She doesn't want to paint herself into a corner where she's suspected of doing something more than she did.
When Crystal tells them about this, they run all the names of these individuals who supposedly are members of this gang, and no one has a criminal record of any kind.
I mean, supposedly they went from basically zero history to murder.
They're a motorcycle gang, missing a few components like a motorcycle. All those other names, and no one has a criminal record. So it's another aspect of the story that raises an eyebrow about Crystal.
We have a girl that's missing for several weeks. We start interviewing the people that lived at the house as well as other associates of theirs.
And when they came in, they all denied any sort of wrongdoing or knowledge of where Tara was at.
Mike Vessel says he has no idea about a 21 Club motorcycle gang. Doesn't even know what that is. Well, that makes two of us, Mike, because we don't know what it is either. They're getting no confirmation from anybody so far. And then they speak to DJ Meyer, the supposed enforcer.
He came in for a second interview. With DJ, I mean, my whole point was just to win his trust.
I don't know what happened.
Okay, was Tara upset with you?
Tara wasn't upset with me. Nothing I know of.
So I talked to him some more and I said, DJ, I just need you to be my witness. You need to tell me what went on.
So did Crystal do it?
I don't know.
They continue to press him because they can feel it, that he's emotional about this.
Let me push.
You know everything you need to know.
And he becomes emotional. And he said, yes, I do know something.
I know there was an argument, but that's all I really know.
He then says that Tara and Crystal had a love-hate relationship, and they would get into arguments all the time. And on the night in question, Crystal and Tara got in a heated argument.
So what do you think? Got her so mad?
I don't know.
How did she kill her?
I don't know how she done it. I don't. I know there was blood, so I'm thinking maybe stabbed her.
What are you doing? What?
He then says Crystal grabbed a knife and stabbed her to death, and DJ's mistake was to help her cover it up.
She was panicked. Told me I need to help her. So I tried to help her. But I don't remember where the body is. I'm not going to prison, right? Okay. I was scared. I never done anything like this.
So we have Crystal pointing her finger at DJ, and DJ pointing his finger back. Which finger should we believe? The detectives believe that Tara's dead by someone's hand. Crystal alleges this group of nitwits who call themselves a gang are the ones responsible. DJ says it's a simple catfight between two women. Which one's true? We'll see.
We didn't have any murder weapons. We didn't have Tara's body. So we were just hoping that we'd get lucky with finding something. So we continued doing the area searches to find Tara's body.
Anderson is the kind of detective that just won't stop. The best kind of detective. That won't ever quit.
I figure there's 6.5, 7 billion people on the planet, and if I'm the one that was trying to help and it still didn't go right, I at least tried.
They search for days and weeks in the Wyoming border area, and they find nothing.
We're still trying to corroborate things that Crystal had said. We went out to the house where Tom Vassell, Mike Vassell, and Carly Hanchett were living outside of Nunn, Colorado.
They go see Thomas Vassell, expecting to find a hardened biker.
Tom Vassell's an unhealthy older gentleman, extremely overweight, on oxygen, pretty much stays at home. But he is also supposedly the leader of this gang.
Instead of finding a badass biker, they find Santa Claus, who's inhaling oxygen. Not exactly an inspiring look.
But this was someone we had to be careful with because Tom had a Glock stuck in the couch next to him.
He is a sick old man at the moment. But 6 pounds of pressure makes him Godzilla. That's how much pressure it takes to pull a trigger.
He claimed not to know anything about what we were talking about.
Thomas does what you would expect him to do. Yeah, my kid Mikey's a good kid. He has some friends, they're all good kids. You want to look around, go right ahead. When Anderson and Boyle are talking to Thomas, they smell an odor from what is likely a burn pit. A lot of people that live remotely in Colorado, there's no garbage service in those remote areas. You have to burn your trash.
We did a search warrant out there, and then our field evidence technicians sifted through all the ashes.
There is no body or body parts, nothing like that. It's very difficult to destroy a human body with fire.
This looks pretty interesting.
It takes the heat generated in a crematorium to do that.
During the search, they found the back of an iPad, consistent with what Vonda had told us, that Tara always had this iPad.
It's pretty suspicious. You know, who burns an iPad?
An iPad is an expensive toy. They don't burn an iPad unless it belongs to a murder victim, and that's most likely what this is. People will destroy evidence of their involvement in a crime, believing that they burn it, it's destroyed, it can't be used against them. But people look for things that people throw away, particularly guys that carry a badge.
So all of this definitely gave some value to the story that they were trying to cover up something that had been done.
We have Crystal's story about the whole gang being involved, and her charming boyfriend DJ's tale of only Crystal being involved. This burned and destroyed iPad in Thomas Vassal's burn pit is evidence of what Crystal said as being the truth, and what DJ is saying is a lie.
We got a search warrant from the phone company for all the phone records of the gang.
When those phones are recovered by the police, they discover something very intriguing.
All the different phones from all these different gang members, it appeared that for the most part, they all stopped at the same time and didn't come back on until the next day.
There was, however, one exception. Mike Vassal, the number 2 wizard of the gang, left his on.
I don't know why he left it on. Probably some level of narcissism, that he's the only one that's capable of communicating if need be.
So we were able to use his phone and using towers to figure out where they went to dump Tara's dog, Diablo, which then made sense where he was found.
And then the police basically put a map on their travels, the early morning hours of Tara's murder, and also the days following where they were, what they were doing.
They discovered the route of travel from Pierce, Colorado to the Wyoming border. They see a stop in a convenience store that sells gas and is open 24 hours near the Wyoming border.
Investigators were able to locate video footage of them going to that gas station and the pickup that they were in.
And there is the 21 motorcycle gang in all their glory. All together with a dead victim in the back of the truck. It's obvious that Thomas Vassal had some level of involvement in this. At this point, there's no evidence to support that he was directly involved. He's not in the video surveillance, but everyone else is in.
So that was a big thing for us. It was huge.
There's always a moment in a case that's been a mystery up to this point that things begin to fall together. They're not all the way together yet, but there's a definite sensation that it's about to be. At this point, they've got evidence against all the players in this. This is the case.
We still didn't have Tara's body, but the detectives and I knew these guys were good for the murder. We felt we had enough to get arrest warrants for them.
What does Anderson know for sure about this group? He knows they're idiots. That's obvious. Anderson puts it out. Come get your cell phones. There was nothing of value on them. We'll give them back. Carly and Mike show up at headquarters to get their phones back and wind up wearing handcuffs instead.
Crystal was arrested at her brother's house in LaSalle. Chad Eiler was arrested without incident at his house as well. And then the U.S. Marshals took Scott into custody at a gas station. With DJ, there was 24-hour surveillance set up on him to make sure that he wasn't going anywhere. That next day, he was arrested.
Right, okay. We know exactly what happened. Okay. And what, this was all over because Tara disrespected Carly?
I guess.
He tells what happened. He confirms Crystal's story. What Crystal's been telling them. The dispute between the victim and Carly was actually true. Carly became furious when Tara demanded she turn down her music.
The group decided that they needed to punish her for the disrespect that she had shown towards Carly.
You were following orders that came from Thomas?
Yes.
Through Mike?
Yeah.
Thomas orders her to be killed for this act, and he orders DJ, as the enforcer, be responsible to carry it out.
I tried talking people out of it, you know, but when you're outnumbered and you got, you know, orders from the doorman, you know what I mean?
So they formed up a plan. They all got their weapon of choice. Their plan was to go up the stairs. Carly's gonna hit her with a pipe, and then everybody's gonna stab her.
Tara texted her mother in the middle of the night and told her to stay by her phone because something may happen. Crystal went into a downstairs bedroom, and then Mike had everybody else go kill Tara upstairs in Tara's bedroom.
They then confront her. Carly hits the victim over the head with a lead pipe. Then DJ stabs her with a hunting knife.
Were you straddling her when you stabbed her, or were you sitting next to her?
I can't sit there. You know, everything was a blur, you know, it's almost like it wasn't happening.
Scott sees that she is suffering from these wounds, and he decides to give her a quick death and stabs her in the spine once, resulting in her immediate demise. When they searched in the room, they found no evidence of blood, so the normal homicide that occurs by stabbing is one killer and one victim. One blade that's driven into the victim over and over, and there's cast off from that blade. Here we have several killers. Each person has a knife, stabs once, removes the blade, it wipes through the clothing coming out that's clean, no cast off. That would explain why the house was clean from blood, because there was no cast off to find. It's not there.
From there, all the others got in the truck and loaded her and Diablo up.
It was the dog, and Tara dropped it separate times?
Yes.
Scott was supposed to kill the dog and dump the dog out in the middle of the grasslands, but he couldn't bring himself to do it, so he just kicked the dog loose.
He doesn't mind killing a human. That's not a problem. But to kill a dog, no, you can't do that.
So how far from the dog do you think Tara is?
100 miles. You know,
really?
Quite. You know, and I'm serious. I believe she's in Wyoming.
The problem remains, where is the victim? No one can remember They're all willing to say what they know, but they don't know enough. They've got evidence against all the players in this, with the exception of Thomas Vassell. And Thomas winds up providing that evidence by talking to his kid on a recorded line inside a jail. This results in the arrest of Thomas.
Just because the leader doesn't get involved and actually do it, they can still be charged with conspiracy under the law. So that's what we did in this case.
They're found guilty of all these various crimes or sentenced to various terms. DJ is sentenced to life in prison. Everybody gets locked up.
So it was a really strong case. But finding the body, that was our main goal. To get justice the best way we can in our system for Vonda.
All I did for like 6 months was drive around, try to find Tara's body. Crystal had described a one-lane dirt road, a sign that said Laramie, and she could hear water nearby. And I went into Google Maps and found an area near that sign that appeared to match the description. And then several of us went up on a road trip up to Wyoming again. We got back in that area and gave it maybe a half-mile stretch of road. Detective Geyer and Detective Walker started on one side of that half-mile stretch, and then the rest of us went up to the other side and we just started working towards each other. We were out there for 15 or 20 minutes and then we came across the carpet.
There is Tara, laying there undisturbed for 187 days.
Sergeant Halloran at the time had cleared everybody out and just kind of let me stay there by myself for a minute. Then immediately after that, I went to find Vonda.
When he came over, he said that they're pretty sure they found her. It became very real that day. Even though it was already real, it was set in cement that day. That she wasn't coming back. I'd never talk to her again. I'd never hold her again. And that my baby was gone.
The autopsy revealed cause of death was stab wounds. Manner of death was homicide.
You get very jaded in this profession. Just when you think you've seen the worst in somebody, the next person's like, hold my beer, watch this. But it's also cases like this. This is why you're in it, it's cases like this.
Although Tara surrounded herself with the wrong type of people, she was trying to make the right decisions, and now the world is without a good person, and that's unfortunate.
The 21 Biker Club was a dream and nothing more than a dream. And they wind up doing this. First-degree murder. But Anderson spent 187 days of his life to find a homicide victim, to bring peace to the family, to try to find some level of justice in the world. When you do, for those few moments, all is right with the world.
Next time on American Detective.
Has she ever been away this long? She never disappeared like that.
We still have no DNA. There is no body that's been found.
We were hoping these texts would prompt him to take us to the body. Whoever did this was some violent monster.
New York, 1985. The city that never sleeps was already a restless beast. Sirens in the night, flashing neon reflected in rain-slick streets, the hum of subways, the metallic rattle of trash can lids slammed shut in dark alleys. But beneath the noise, beneath the constant rhythm of life, there was a silence that no one could explain, a silence left behind by one girl who vanished without a trace. Her name was Laura Bennett, 23 years old. A college graduate with ambitions of becoming a journalist, she carried a notebook everywhere, jotting down fragments of life, faces on the subway, overheard conversations, sudden ideas. She lived in a modest apartment on the Lower East Side, worked part-time at a bookstore, and dreamed of joining one of the big New York papers. People described her as sharp, witty, always curious, but also fragile, like someone who constantly carried the weight of secrets she hadn't yet put into words. On a cold November night, Laura left the bookstore just before 9. She waved goodbye to a coworker, pulled her scarf tight against the wind, and started walking toward the subway. She never made it home. The next morning, her landlord noticed the unopened newspaper at her door. Hours passed. By noon, her coworker reported her missing. The police filed a report, but in 1985, missing adult cases often lingered without urgency, especially in a city drowning in crime, homicides, and drugs. But Laura's disappearance struck differently. Her friends insisted she wasn't the type to vanish. Her parents, frantic and sleepless, drove down from Albany, plastering the neighborhood with flyers. The community whispered. Something felt wrong. Detectives followed the trail. Witnesses said they saw Laura on Delancey Street around 9:15, walking quickly, clutching her bag. A bartender remembered a girl matching her description entering a dim bar on Orchard Street, asking to use the payphone. Then nothing. The bar had no cameras, no record of her call, if she ever made one. Outside, the streets swallowed her. Days turned into weeks. Police scoured abandoned buildings, questioned drifters, checked hospitals. They dragged the East River, fearing the worst. Every lead evaporated. It was as if Laura had been erased. The newspapers picked up the story, ironically giving Laura the ink she had once sought as a reporter. Young woman vanishes on Lower East Side, read one headline. Another mystery in the city of fear. In those years, New York felt like a city under siege. Crime was rampant, crack cocaine was spreading, the subways were tagged in graffiti, the parks filled with shadows. Yet Laura's case stood out because it carried no logic, no obvious danger, just the chilling absence of explanation. Her parents refused to let her fade into statistics. They pushed the police. They begged for press coverage. They appeared on local television, holding her photo, their voices trembling but resolute. Someone knows what happened to our daughter. But months passed, then years. The case went cold. The box with Laura's name was shelved in the precinct basement. Inside, photographs of her smiling with her friends, her handwriting scrawled across her journals, faded flyers yellowing with time, and the typed reports of detectives who eventually moved on. The city moved on too, burying Laura's story beneath the avalanche of new crimes, new tragedies. For decades, she became a ghost in police records, a haunting reminder of how quickly a life could vanish in New York. But every so often, someone remembered. The bartender who saw her that night swore he could still see her face every time the payphone in the corner caught his eye. A childhood friend, grown older, admitted she never walked alone at night after Laura disappeared, and her parents, now elderly, kept her bedroom exactly as it was in 1985, the notebook stacked neatly, the bed made, as if waiting for her to return. 38 years later, that box was pulled from the dust again. But back in 1985, the silence deepened. The investigation had gaps that gnawed at those who studied the file later. Why wasn't the bar's payphone line checked thoroughly? Why wasn't the bartender asked more questions about who else was in the room that night? Why wasn't the subway footage, grainy though it was, reviewed longer than a few days? The truth is, Laura's case was one among hundreds. Detectives were overworked, homicide squads drowning in bodies. Missing adults were rarely prioritized unless blood was found. And yet, whispers lingered. Some officers admitted quietly there was something about this one that haunted them. Laura's journals, recovered from her apartment, became a point of obsession for her parents. She had written cryptic notes. Meeting tomorrow. Don't forget Orchard. Another page. He said there are stories people will kill to keep quiet. Were these the musings of a budding journalist or the warning signs of someone who stumbled too close to danger? Police dismissed them as fragments, unrelated. But friends recalled that in her last weeks, Laura seemed preoccupied, tense, as if she was chasing something she couldn't name. Speculation spread. Some believed she uncovered something criminal during her bookstore shifts, maybe overhearing deals, maybe talking to the wrong people. Others suggested she had a secret life, a relationship hidden from her family. Rumors swirled through the neighborhood, feeding on fear, until the line between fact and imagination blurred. The years turned the case into a ghost story. Parents warned daughters not to walk alone. Locals said the corner of Orchard and Delancey carried bad luck. Some even claimed her shadow could be seen in the bar's window late at night, waiting eternally for a phone call that never connected. By the mid-1990s, the bar had closed, the building boarded up, then later converted into upscale apartments. But the memory of Laura persisted in whispers, her photograph occasionally resurfacing in anniversary articles titled Unsolved New York Mystery. Each time, her parents clutched at hope, waiting for the phone to ring with new leads. It never did. Then, in 2023, the cold case unit decided to reopen several unsolved files from the 1980s. Technology had advanced. Old evidence could be tested. Forgotten details could be revisited with new eyes. Among the dusty boxes, an officer pulled Laura's file, and what they found inside would shake the city again. But back in 1985, no one knew that the truth was already etched into the smallest of details, overlooked, dismissed, waiting for the right eyes to see. The night she disappeared, a drizzle had started, coating the sidewalks in a slick shine. A street vendor recalled a girl in a scarf passing quickly, her shoes splashing in shallow puddles. He remembered because she dropped something, a small notebook dampened by the rain. He picked it up, but when he looked around, she was already gone. He kept it for a day, thinking someone would return. Then, fearing trouble, he tossed it into the trash. A trivial act. Yet inside that notebook may have been the final clue to Laura's fate. The city devoured evidence like that. Clues lost in trash cans, testimonies swallowed by noise, memories fading under the crush of time. By the time detectives circled back, those fragments were already gone. Still, the image lingered. Laura, standing at a payphone in a dim bar, her hand trembling as she dialed, her voice unheard over the jukebox and the clinking glasses. What did she say? Who did she call? Did someone pick up? Or was the line dead? That unanswered question hung over the case like a storm cloud, unresolved, suffocating. And so the case froze. A young woman disappeared, a city forgot, a family grieved. But time has a way of circling back. When the box was opened nearly 4 decades later, and the files spread across the desks of modern investigators, new eyes caught what old ones had missed. DNA samples preserved on clothing, a fingerprint overlooked on a page, a name scribbled in a margin that no one had connected. Suddenly, silence gave way to sound again. The story was alive. And in the heart of New York, a community that once whispered about shadows now braced itself for a truth more disturbing than the silence had ever been. The file lay open under fluorescent light, its papers brittle, its photographs curling at the edges. 38 years of dust, 3 decades of silence, and yet the name Laura Bennett suddenly filled the room again. The cold case detectives of 2023 were not like their predecessors. They had tools undreamed of in the 1980s. DNA analysis so sensitive it could extract profiles from fragments invisible to the eye. Digital databases of fingerprints, of faces, of phone records once locked away in forgotten ledgers. This was no longer a ghost story, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. They began where the old investigation had ended. Laura's clothing, stored in sealed bags since 1985, carried stains, fibers, particles. Under modern testing, microscopic traces came alive. A partial DNA profile emerged, too incomplete to identify alone, but enough to cross-reference. For years, the police had believed Laura's bag vanished with her. Yet in the evidence box, her worn leather satchel remained, cataloged but never fully examined. Inside were the usual items, coins, pens, a paperback novel, but also something missed before, a scrap of paper with numbers scrawled hastily, a phone number. Investigators dialed it, disconnected, long dead, but archives revealed it once belonged to a payphone. Yes, the very same one in the Orchard Street bar where Laura was last seen. Suddenly, the circle closed. She had tried to call someone, and when she wrote down the number, it wasn't random. It was a lifeline. Detectives cross-checked the bar itself. The building's records led to its former owner, now in his 80s, living quietly in Florida. He remembered little, at first claiming he'd sold the place decades ago and wanted nothing to do with it. But pressed, he admitted something chilling. There had been a man, a regular, always lingering near that phone booth, watching, listening. He wasn't a friend, more like a shadow. No one ever knew his name. The cold case team dug deeper. Old arrest logs, neighborhood surveillance, photographs from police raids in the 1980s, and there he was, a man with hollow eyes, a scar above his lip, his name scribbled in one report, Daniel Cross. Arrested twice for assault, suspected of harassment but never convicted. He had lived only blocks from the bookstore where Laura worked. His presence was always there, circling like a wolf at the edge of the firelight. But Daniel Cross had disappeared too. His file ended in 1991, no record after that. Dead? Moved away? Or hiding under a different name? The detectives pressed on. They tracked fingerprints from Laura's satchel. One print, faint but preserved, returned a hit. It belonged to a man arrested in 2003 for burglary in Queens. The name matched. Daniel Cross. Alive, older, still within New York. A ghost reborn in the system. The news hit like a thunderclap. A suspect hidden in plain sight. A man who had lived undetected while Laura's parents grew old, waiting for answers. But the detectives knew better than to celebrate. A print in a satchel was not proof of murder. They needed more. They needed the story of that night, pieced together with precision. They pulled out witness statements again. The bartender, long since dead, had left behind notes in the police file. Girl looked scared, phone call short, guy near booth staring. Words ignored for decades now glared with significance. Who was the call to? The police never traced it. In 2023, they could. Phone records from the 1980s had been archived by the phone company, scanned into microfilm, later digitized. It took weeks, but eventually they found the log. At 9:17 p.m., November 14, 1985, the Orchard Street payphone placed a call to a Manhattan number belonging to the New York Times newsroom desk. The revelation froze the detectives. Laura hadn't been calling her parents. She hadn't been reaching a friend. She had been calling the paper. She had been trying to share something urgent enough to risk dialing from a noisy bar payphone. But what? Investigators scoured her journals again, this time with digital enhancement. Words faded by age were magnified, clarified. Phrases emerged that once seemed meaningless. Orchard files. He warned me. Cross-watching. The pieces clicked. Laura had been working on something. She wasn't just a bookstore clerk. She was investigating, quietly, recklessly, like the journalist she aspired to be, and she had stumbled onto Daniel Cross. The detectives turned to Cross's life. He had grown up in the neighborhood, a troubled man with a history of violence. His police file hinted at darker associations, gang activity, drug routes, extortion. In 1985, Orchard Street wasn't the glossy stretch of boutiques it would become. It was shadowed, controlled by dealers and loan sharks, watched by men like Cross. Was Laura writing about them? Did she confront him? Did she see something she wasn't supposed to see? Questions piled on questions, but one fact emerged like a knife in the dark. She was silenced. The cold case team now had reason to suspect Cross, but suspicion wasn't enough. They needed the body, and Laura had never been found. So they reopened every abandoned building search, every lot, every forgotten basement near Orchard Street. Maps from the 1980s were compared with satellite images. One location stood out, a warehouse abandoned in 1985, demolished years later, replaced by a parking garage. The police had searched it once, but briefly. Could Laura's body have been buried under its foundations? Cadaver dogs were brought to the site, sniffing along the concrete. At one corner, they alerted. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies beneath the surface. The team drilled, dust rose, concrete cracked, and then, beneath layers of rubble, fragments of bone surfaced. Tests confirmed what everyone feared and expected. Human remains, female, matching Laura's age. DNA taken from her parents, still alive but frail, confirmed it. After nearly 40 years, Laura had been found. The news broke like a storm. Cold case solved, missing woman of 1985 identified. Television crews camped outside the precinct. Headlines screamed across screens. The girl who vanished returns as bones beneath the city. For the Bennetts, it was a moment of horror and relief. Their daughter would finally be laid to rest, but justice, that was still far away. Detectives focused on Daniel Cross. He was now in his 60s, living in a modest house in Queens under his real name. No disguises, no running. He had been hiding in plain sight, an old man with groceries in his cart, neighbors who described him as quiet, solitary, but the past was written in his eyes. Surveillance was placed. Officers watched as he walked his dog, collected his mail, sat on his porch. The man who had once haunted Orchard Street was now a ghost of himself. Yet behind the quiet exterior, detectives believed, lay the truth of Laura's last night. They obtained a warrant, collected his DNA, matched it against the trace recovered from Laura's clothing. It was a hit. The profile aligned. After 38 years, the circle closed. The arrest was swift, carried out at dawn. Police swarmed his house, hands pressed against walls, cuffs clicking shut. Neighbors woke to flashing lights, stunned as headlines soon blared. Arrest made in 1985, cold case. For the city, it was a shock. For Laura's family, it was an earthquake. Yet even in chains, Daniel Cross said nothing. He looked at the cameras, expression flat, as if daring the world to guess what had really happened. And so the trial of memory began. The courtroom lights burned bright, reflecting off polished wood, and the faces of reporters jammed shoulder to shoulder. 38 years of silence had erupted into a public storm, and the name Daniel Cross was now inked into every headline. The prosecution painted him as a predator, a man who prowled the Lower East Side in the shadows of the mid-1980s, who silenced a young woman before her words could reach the newsroom. The defense countered with disbelief. No eyewitness, no murder weapon, only fragments of DNA and a skeleton buried in concrete. But the trial was more than evidence. It was memory clawing its way back to life. Laura's parents sat in the front row, their hands trembling as testimony unfolded. The father, frail yet defiant, whispered each time his daughter's name was spoken, as if keeping her alive in the air. The mother clutched a notebook of Laura's, its pages worn, her thumb tracing the ink where Laura once scribbled dreams of journalism. Their presence was silent thunder, an accusation that filled the room. The prosecutors began with the journals. Projected on a screen were pages magnified, phrases circled in red. Cross-watching, he said stories people would kill to hide. Words once dismissed as musings now stood like warnings. The jury leaned forward, the image of Laura's neat handwriting, paired with the name of the man sitting in chains across the room, cast a spell of inevitability. Then came the phone call. Records showed her dialing the newsroom desk of the New York Times on the night she vanished. A retired editor, now white-haired, took the stand. He admitted he didn't remember that specific call. Too many came in, too many tips over the years, but he swore the logs were real. Someone tried to reach them at 9:17 p.m. from Orchard Street, someone desperate. The prosecution connected the dots. Laura had uncovered something she had written about Cross. She had tried to call the paper, and within minutes she vanished. Then came the DNA. A forensic expert explained how modern technology extracted the trace from Laura's clothing, a strand of skin cells preserved in fabric. The match to Cross's profile was clear. The science was undeniable. The jury listened, their faces set, their pens scratching notes. But the defense rose like a blade. They argued contamination, evidence stored for nearly 4 decades, shuffled between boxes, could not be trusted. They argued the journals were hearsay, the writings of a young woman with an imagination. They reminded the jury that Laura's actual cause of death was unknown. Her skeleton gave no clear answer, no gunshot, no knife wound, no blunt trauma visible. She could have died in many ways, they claimed, and they hammered the lack of eyewitnesses. No one saw Cross take her, no one saw him bury her. The battle raged, word against word, science against skepticism. Then the prosecution called a surprise witness. He was old now, frail, his voice cracking as he took the stand. A former bartender, the very man who had served Laura that night. Everyone thought he was dead. For years his name had been absent from records, swallowed by time, but he had been found in a nursing home in Jersey, still alive, memory frayed but not broken. He spoke slowly, eyes wet with age. He remembered her. A young woman, scarf pulled tight, nervous, standing at the phone booth. He remembered Cross too, sitting in the corner, beer untouched, eyes locked on her. "I saw fear," the bartender whispered, fear in her face when she looked at him. The courtroom stilled. His words, fragile as glass, cut through decades of silence. Cross shifted in his chair, expression unchanged. But for the first time, the jury had an image more vivid than evidence. Laura in that bar, a predator watching. The prosecution pressed further. They revealed Cross's history. Assaults dismissed, women who had filed complaints of stalking, but later dropped charges. A neighbor who recalled him following girls from the subway. Patterns ignored in the 1980s when records were scattered and police were overwhelmed. The portrait sharpened. Daniel Cross, a man who haunted women, who thrived in the blind spots of a chaotic city. Still, the defense fought. They reminded the jury that memory fades, that an old bartender's words could not be trusted after 38 years. That suspicion was not proof. And then, as if on cue, the trial twisted again. The prosecution produced photographs, old crime scene images never shown before. They were of the warehouse where Laura's remains were found. Beneath rubble and concrete, fragments of fabric were preserved. One piece, a torn scrap of shirt, bore faint bloodstains. Technology in the 1980s had failed to analyze them. But now, in 2023, they screamed with clarity. DNA matched Laura, and on the same scrap, mixed faintly with hers, was Cross's. The courtroom gasped. The science had spoken twice. Reporters scribbled furiously. DNA double-hit links suspect. Television anchors rehearsed their breaking news lines in whispers. The parents clutched each other's hands, eyes wide, tears falling silently. The defense faltered. Their arguments thinned. The evidence was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. But even as the case strengthened, a darker question emerged, one that prosecutors hesitated to ask aloud. What had Laura uncovered? The journals hinted at files, at secrets on Orchard Street, at people who would kill to stay hidden. Cross might have been the executioner, but was he the only one? Or was he just a blade in a larger machine? The trial did not answer. It was not about motives, not about networks. It was about one man and one young woman, bound together in tragedy, yet the shadow of something bigger loomed. Cross himself finally spoke. On the 5th day of trial, the defense called him to the stand. Shackled, aged, he stared at the jury with hollow defiance. He admitted knowing Laura. He admitted seeing her in the bar, but he denied killing her. He said she was chasing ghosts, that she was writing stories she didn't understand. He claimed she left the bar alive, that he never saw her again. The courtroom crackled with unease. His voice was gravel, his words soaked in contempt. Was he lying, or was there truth buried in his denial? The prosecution tore at him. They showed the DNA, they showed the journals, they showed the bartender's testimony. They forced him to admit his violent past, his arrests, his silence when police once questioned him. Still, he held his line. "I didn't kill her. You're all looking in the wrong place." The jury watched, some shaking their heads, others frozen, unsure. The trial ended its third week with tension at a fever pitch. The case was strong, but not perfect. DNA linked him, yes, but no cause of death was proven. Motive hovered in shadows, and Cross's cryptic words, "wrong place," echoed in everyone's ears. Outside the courthouse, the city pulsed with fascination. Crowds gathered at barricades. News vans lined the street. Talk radio dissected every word. On social media, Laura's name trended, her face circulating like it was 1985 again. For her parents, it was unbearable. They had waited almost 4 decades for justice, but even in the courtroom, it felt slippery, elusive. Was this truly the man, or was he part of something larger that remained untouched? And in the quiet of the night, the detectives themselves wondered. Laura's notebook spoke of files, of stories buried in Orchard Street shadows. If Cross was right, if she had uncovered something deeper, then her death was not just a personal crime, it was a silencing. The trial carried forward, relentless, the jury caught between certainty and doubt. But beyond the polished courtroom, the unanswered question festered, a wound still open. What exactly did Laura Bennett know? Outside the courthouse, New York turned into a stage. News cameras lined the sidewalks like vultures, their lenses fixed on every face that stepped through the heavy wooden doors. Headlines screamed from every corner stand. Cold case breaks open in Manhattan courtroom. Talk shows debated guilt before the jury could. Radio callers argued late into the night, voices thick with outrage, disbelief, fear. And through it all, the name Laura Bennett lived again, a name once relegated to yellowed flyers now painted in bold across glowing screens. Reporters dug into her past, unearthing old photographs, interviewing aging classmates, revisiting the bookstore where she had worked. Customers remembered her smile, her eagerness to recommend novels, the quiet determination behind her eyes. The coverage was relentless. To the city, Laura was no longer just a victim. She had become a symbol of an era when New York devoured the innocent and spat out silence. But the media frenzy wasn't only about her. It was about what she might have known. Journalists pored over her notebooks, desperate for a story hidden in the faded ink. Orchard Street, 1985. Files, secrets, names scrawled in cryptic shorthand. Theories multiplied. Had Laura uncovered a drug network, a corrupt official, something tied to organized crime? Each possibility made the story bigger, darker, heavier. And the longer the trial went on, the more people wondered if Daniel Cross was merely one face in a crowd of shadows. Detectives behind the scenes felt the same unease. The journals gnawed at them. Stories people will kill to hide. Cross watching. Meeting tomorrow, don't forget Orchard. She had been chasing something, but the old records gave no clarity. Files had been lost, boxes destroyed in floods, evidence rooms cleaned out over decades. What had been waiting for Laura that night? Who else had been watching her besides Cross? Back in the courtroom, the tension mounted. The prosecution hammered on DNA. 2 separate samples tied him to her remains. They argued probability, science, the undeniable numbers. But the defense fought tooth and nail, sowing doubt at every turn. They reminded the jury that bones told no story of cause, that fear and suspicion could not substitute for proof, that Cross's presence near her was not the same as murder. Still, the public wasn't swayed. Outside, chants rose with cardboard signs. Justice for Laura. Monsters don't age. People gathered at night, candles in hand, their voices trembling with anger. The case had become more than legal. It was emotional, personal. It was the city demanding an answer for decades of silence. And yet, cracks widened in the story. A retired detective, gray-haired and weary, stepped forward to speak to the press. He had worked the original case in 1985. His words dropped like stones in a still pond. "We were told to back off certain angles," he said. "Not by Cross, by higher up." She was looking into something sensitive. The revelation sparked fire. Was Laura silenced because she had been too close to a bigger truth? Did the city itself bury her story? The prosecution tried to steer focus back to Cross. But the air was heavy with suspicion, thicker than proof. Jurors weren't sequestered from whispers on the street. They heard the rumors, felt the pressure, and in the silence of deliberation, the unanswered questions could fester like poison. Meanwhile, the Bennetts clung to each word of testimony, each shred of evidence, as if their daughter's voice was speaking through them. Their faces on camera, lined with grief and years of waiting, struck the city harder than any headline. When the mother spoke outside the courthouse holding a framed photo of Laura, her voice cracked. "We don't care what secrets there were, we just want truth. We just want peace for her." But peace was not what the trial delivered. Midway through, the defense dropped a bombshell. They introduced a witness no one expected. A former warehouse worker, now in his 70s, who claimed he saw men carrying something heavy into the abandoned building the night Laura disappeared. He remembered Cross, yes, but he also remembered 2 others, Men he said were known in the neighborhood for connections to organized crime. He swore under oath Cross wasn't alone. The courtroom rippled. The prosecution scrambled. This was not the story they had prepared. They had built a case of one predator and one victim. Now the shadow of others crept in, unseen figures in the night. The jury's faces shifted. Doubt entered. Could Cross have been part of something larger, maybe even forced into silence himself? Or was the old man's memory fractured by decades of dust and rumor? The uncertainty spread like smoke. The media seized on it instantly. Headlines split. Cold case suspect linked to mob. Commentators shouted across screens. The trial was no longer only about Laura. It was about the city's old wounds, the ghosts of the 1980s that never healed. Detectives behind the scenes scrambled too. They reopened files on organized crime in the Lower East Side, names long forgotten, photographs of men who once ran blocks with iron fists. And there, buried in faded reports, were connections to Daniel Cross. He wasn't a lone predator. He had been an errand man, a shadow on the margins of bigger monsters. The realization chilled investigators. If Laura had uncovered that network, if she had written names in those journals, then her death had been more than random. It had been deliberate, a silencing, and if Cross was just one piece, the others had escaped untouched, free for decades. But the courtroom wasn't about others, it was about him. And the evidence still bound him, DNA tying his shadow to her bones. Cross remained silent. He sat each day with the same expression, neither anger nor sorrow, just emptiness, and that emptiness enraged the city more than any outburst could. As the trial pressed on, the community outside grew restless. Candlelight vigils turned into marches. Murals of Laura appeared on brick walls, her face painted beside words. Truth never dies. For a generation too young to remember her disappearance, she became a symbol, a story of injustice, frozen in time. But symbols can burn hotter than facts, and when the defense hammered again on missing proof, no cause of death, no eyewitness to the killing, the fear crept in. Could the jury, despite the DNA, despite the journals, despite the bones, still hesitate? Could they let him slip through after nearly 40 years? The possibility chilled everyone. Reporters whispered of mistrials. Families of other cold cases came forward, begging that Laura not become another name lost in archives. Pressure mounted on the prosecution. They needed a killing blow. They found it not in files, not in witnesses, but in sound. Buried deep in archives was an old tape. Police interviews recorded in 1986, forgotten in storage. Among them was Daniel Cross. His voice, younger, sharper, caught on crackling cassette. He was asked about Laura, about the night she vanished. And on that tape, long ignored, he said words that froze the courtroom when played. She was asking too many questions. She should have stayed quiet. The line echoed like thunder. Cross's defense tried to dismiss it as circumstantial, but the damage was done. For the jury, the science was already heavy, the journals already haunting. Now they heard his voice, admitting fear of her questions, dismissing her as a threat. It was not a confession, but it was close enough to feel like one. The trial shifted again. The jury leaned forward. The reporter's pen scratched furiously. The parents closed their eyes, tears streaming as if finally Laura was speaking for herself. The shadow of other men, other secrets remained. But the focus snapped back to him, to Cross, to the predator who had waited near the phone booth, eyes fixed on a girl with too many questions and not enough time. The city held its breath as the trial neared its climax. The jury filed out, 12 ordinary New Yorkers carrying the weight of nearly 40 years of silence. The doors shut behind them with a heavy echo, leaving the courtroom suspended in stillness. Reporters shifted in their seats, cameras readied, the world outside buzzing like a hive. But inside, there was only waiting. Deliberations stretched into hours, then into a second day. The city hung on every update. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, candles flickering even in daylight, voices chanting for justice. Talk radio speculated endlessly. Some claimed the DNA was enough to seal Cross's fate. Others warned the defense had planted enough seeds of doubt. Headlines battled across front pages. DNA speaks loudest against no cause of death. Is it enough? Inside that jury room, tension cracked like static. Some jurors wanted conviction, pointing to the science, the journals, the tape of Cross's words. She should have stayed quiet. Others hesitated, staring at photographs of bones, at timelines blurred by decades, at the haunting possibility of missing pieces. What if he was guilty, but not alone? What if convicting him left the real architects of Laura's silence untouched? The arguments spiraled, voices rising, pens tapping against wooden tables. Meanwhile, Laura's parents waited in the hallway, faces pale, hands entwined. For them, every hour felt like a lifetime. They had waited 38 years. What was another day? Yet the wait cut deeper than any before. The verdict would not bring their daughter back, but it would decide whether her ghost lingered in silence or finally had a voice. Cross sat in his cell, expression unreadable. He asked for no visitors, spoke to no one but his lawyer. When guards passed, he simply stared ahead, a man who seemed carved from stone. The whispers of his past, the shadows of the mob, the memory of the girl at the phone booth, none of it cracked his mask. To some, that silence was proof of guilt. To others, it was the face of doubt. On the third day, the jury returned. The courtroom filled to bursting. Reporters clutched microphones, sketch artists poised their pencils. Laura's parents sat rigid in the front row, their daughter's photograph in the mother's lap. The judge asked the foreperson, had the jury reached a verdict? The words that followed silenced the city. Guilty. The words struck like thunder. Guilty on charges of second-degree murder, guilty on unlawful disposal of a body, guilty after 38 years. Gasps broke across the room. Some wept, others cheered. Reporters stormed out to deliver the headline before the ink was even dry. The Bennetts collapsed into each other's arms, tears of grief and relief indistinguishable. For them, the word was not enough, but it was something. For decades, they had lived with nothing. Cross stood, face blank, as the verdict was read. He showed no rage, no sorrow. Only when led away in cuffs did he pause, turning once to look at the gallery. His eyes, hollow and defiant, seemed to burn with words he never spoke. Then he was gone. Outside, the city erupted. Strangers embraced. Chants of justice for Laura rang against the courthouse walls. Headlines rolled across screens. Verdict at last, 1985, cold case closed. Television anchors spoke with solemn weight, framing the trial as the victory of persistence, of science, of memory refusing to die. But even in triumph, shadows remained. The verdict answered who, it did not answer why. The journals still whispered of secrets on Orchard Street. The old bartender had sworn Cross wasn't alone. The warehouse worker had spoken of men carrying heavy loads, and Cross's own words lingered. She was asking too many questions. What questions? What answers cost her life? Detectives left the courtroom unsatisfied. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but in their gut, the story wasn't finished. The city, too, felt it. In coffee shops, in subway cars, in offices, conversations turned to speculation. Was this really the whole truth? Or had the trial been a neatly wrapped ending to a story that was anything but neat? Laura's parents tried to focus on closure. They spoke to reporters, voices trembling but firm. We are grateful. We finally know. We can bury her with peace. Yet in private, the questions tormented them. Had their daughter uncovered something vast, something that reached beyond one man? And if so, would they ever know what it was? Cross was sentenced swiftly. The judge delivered words with cold precision. Life imprisonment without parole. The gavel struck. The man who had haunted a family, a neighborhood, a city, was locked away. But in the silence that followed, a strange unease spread. Because justice in headlines is not always justice in truth. Detectives returned to Laura's notebooks, flipping pages late into the night. One entry in particular refused to fade. He said stories people will kill to keep quiet. Who was he? Not Cross. Someone else. Someone she trusted enough to confide in. Someone who knew the danger. That person had never come forward. That voice had never been identified. Theories spread. Some whispered of mob bosses now dead, their graves hiding answers. Others suggested corruption, officials who looked away in 1985, who had buried leads under paperwork. The city's memory is long, but not infinite. Too many names had vanished, too many files lost. Still, the image of Laura remained fixed. A young woman in a scarf, clutching her bag, standing at a phone booth, eyes flicking to the man in the corner. Her story had been silenced, but not erased. And for New York, that silence became its own verdict. At vigils, people repeated her name, candles glowing against the night sky. Artists painted murals of her face across brick walls, eyes bright, notebook in hand. She became a symbol not only of tragedy, but of truth's fragility. One question too many. One truth too dangerous. Cross sat behind bars, but the deeper shadows of 1985 still lingered. The city had won justice, but not answers. And sometimes, answers cut deeper than justice ever could. In the end, New York carried both. A verdict on paper and a question in its heart. The gavel had fallen. The cameras had moved on. The headlines shifted to new scandals, new tragedies. But in New York, the echo of the verdict lingered like smoke trapped between skyscrapers. People remembered Laura's face, painted on murals, flickering in candlelight vigils. They remembered her notebooks, her voice frozen in ink. They remembered the phrase repeated over and over in courtroom whispers. She should have stayed quiet. Daniel Cross sat in a cell at Rikers Island, his world now reduced to concrete walls and iron bars. He spoke to no one, ate in silence, eyes vacant as guards passed by. But in that silence, rumors bloomed. Fellow inmates whispered that he muttered names in his sleep, names no one recognized. Others claimed he scratched symbols into the wall with his fingernails, patterns like maps. The truth was impossible to confirm, but the image spread. Cross was guilty, yes, but he carried secrets still locked in his head. Outside, detectives couldn't shake the same feeling. The trial had ended, but their work had not. Laura's journals were evidence, but they were also a roadmap, unfinished, cryptic, pulsing with directions toward something deeper. Orchard Files. Meeting tomorrow. Stories people will kill to keep quiet. They read like coordinates, and in those coordinates, investigators saw the outline of something bigger than one man with a scar and a history of violence. The cold case unit pushed forward, even without headlines. They revisited the neighborhood, now gentrified, its gritty 1980s shadows replaced by glass storefronts and luxury apartments. Orchard Street no longer smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke. It smelled of roasted coffee and new paint. But beneath the shine, ghosts lingered. They walked past the spot where the bar once stood, now a boutique with mannequins in the window. They paused in the parking garage where Laura's remains had been found. The concrete there hummed with memory. Neighbors, older now, spoke in fragments. One woman recalled men with suits and slick cars always parked outside the warehouse back then. Another remembered Laura visiting a corner shop, talking to the owner in hushed tones. A retired cop admitted that the precinct in the 1980s had been flooded with mob activity. Cases shuffled, leads buried, orders whispered from above. Patterns emerged. Laura hadn't stumbled blindly. She had been following something. She had been tracing shadows that led to organized crime. Men whose names had faded, but whose influence lingered in whispers. Cross was part of it, but not the whole of it. Meanwhile, the media circled back. Weeks after the verdict, investigative reporters dug into Orchard Street's history. They uncovered stories of racketeering, money laundering, extortion rings tied to real estate. Names surfaced, men who died in prison, men who disappeared, men who lived quietly in Florida retirements. Each article linked the past to the present, hinting that Laura's murder had been a silencing of a reporter before she ever had the title. The Bennetts, her parents, watched it all unfold with heavy hearts. They had justice, but not peace. Interviews showed their exhaustion. The father said, "We know who killed her, but we don't know why, and the why matters." The mother, clutching her daughter's journal, whispered, "She died for a story. We don't even know which story." Their grief pressed harder than any verdict. Cross's lawyer appealed. He claimed evidence contamination, unreliable witnesses, judicial error, but the appeal wasn't what captured attention. It was Cross himself. In a rare outburst, recorded by a guard, he shouted through bars at night, "You think it was me? You think I was the only one? Look harder. Look at Orchard." The recording leaked. Headlines roared again. Convicted killer claims he wasn't alone. The city split. Some dismissed it as the desperate ramblings of a guilty man. Others felt a chill. What if he was telling the truth? What if Laura had been silenced not by one man, but by a web too vast to name? Detectives leaned into the question. They dug up financial records from the mid-1980s, dusty ledgers of properties along Orchard Street. Strange patterns emerged. Shell companies, sudden ownership transfers, businesses burned and rebuilt. The names behind them led back to men with mob ties. And in the margins of one document, a signature appeared. Daniel Cross. He hadn't been the boss. He had been the runner, the errand man, the shadow in corners. But shadows are dangerous. They see everything. The deeper the detectives dug, the more they realized Laura had walked into a storm. She wasn't chasing Cross alone. She had been chasing the network he served, and that network had silenced her. Cross was the face they could convict, the one left alive, but the machine that had ground her story into dust had vanished, leaving only bones. For the city, that realization brought unease. Justice had been declared, but truth remained fractured. People lit candles for Laura not only as a victim, but as a symbol of unanswered questions. On walls across the Lower East Side, graffiti scrawled her name beside words, "She knew." The unease seeped into official halls. Politicians spoke carefully, promising further investigation. Journalists dug harder, pressing for declassified files, questioning why leads were dropped in 1985. Each discovery hinted at a bigger story: corruption, collusion, fear. And Laura had been standing in the middle of it when the night swallowed her. But the truth remained slippery. Witnesses were dead, records destroyed, the city's memory fragmented. The verdict had sealed Cross's fate, but not the mystery. Late at night, in the cold case unit's office, a detective flipped again through Laura's notebook. One line stood out, circled in her own handwriting. "He warned me." Who was he? Not Cross. Someone else. Someone she trusted. Someone who had seen the danger coming. That voice had never surfaced. That ghost still haunted the margins. And so even with a man behind bars, even with justice stamped on paper, the silence persisted. Because justice closes cases, but truth never closes. It lingers, restless, demanding, whispering. And in New York, the whisper of Laura Bennett still drifts down Orchard Street, through boutiques and coffee shops, past parking garages and brick walls painted with her face. The whisper of a question never answered. What exactly had she uncovered? The verdict was written in ink, but the story refused to stay on the page. New York buzzed with unease, the kind that seeps into subway stations and whispers in diners. Justice had been served, but truth still wandered like a ghost, unmoored, unfinished. Investigative reporters smelled blood. They descended on Orchard Street with cameras and notebooks, combing through archives, chasing aging witnesses, digging up the bones of the city itself. Articles multiplied, exposés on real estate corruption, forgotten mob trials, secret deals that shaped entire blocks. They painted Laura Bennett not only as a victim, but as a prophet, someone who saw the rot beneath the city before the city was ready to admit it. Headlines blared, "What did Laura know?" Mob money and Manhattan murder. Cold case, hot secrets. The public devoured every theory. Some claimed she uncovered a drug pipeline that fed the Lower East Side in the crack years. Others whispered about politicians on mob payrolls, about judges who buried cases in exchange for favors. The frenzy turned Laura into a symbol bigger than her own life, an emblem of truth smothered by power. Her parents, weary but unbroken, stood before microphones again. The father's voice shook but carried steel. "If our daughter died chasing the truth, then let that truth come out. Don't let her die twice, once in the ground, once in silence." The mother's words cut deeper. She was silenced. We cannot let the silence win. The city listened. Meanwhile, the cold case detectives pushed further, their offices filled with maps, ledgers, photographs. They traced the shell companies owning properties along Orchard Street. One led to a construction firm dissolved in 1987, another to a nightclub notorious for laundering money. Each path twisted back to names long dead or vanished, but the pattern was undeniable. Laura had been chasing corruption tied to real estate, a web that strangled neighborhoods and filled pockets with cash. Cross had been a pawn. The question was, whose pawn? And then another fragment surfaced. From the police archives, a forgotten envelope appeared, misfiled, overlooked. Inside was a cassette tape, unmarked except for a date, November 13th, 1985, the day before Laura disappeared. On it, a crackling voice, female, breathless. "This is Laura Bennett. If anything happens, Orchard Street, look there, look at the files." The tape ended abruptly, as if cut short. The room fell silent. Her voice, reaching through decades, was alive again. The detectives played it again and again, chills running down their spines. She knew she was in danger. She left a message, and it had sat in a box for nearly 40 years. The tape leaked to the press. New York erupted. Televisions blared her words. Radios replayed them on loop. Social media flooded with her voice. People stopped in sidewalks, frozen as they listened to a dead woman warned from the past. The tape was a spark in dry wood. Protests ignited outside City Hall. Crowds chanted, "Look at Orchard, look at Orchard." Politicians scrambled. Officials promised inquiries. The mayor gave a solemn speech about transparency, about confronting the city's dark past. But behind closed doors, panic spread. Because the tape wasn't just a ghost, it was an accusation. It implied failure, negligence, maybe even cover-up. Daniel Cross, behind bars, heard the tape too. Word spread that when guards played it for him, he laughed. Not a manic laugh, but a hollow, tired one. And then he muttered, "She warned you. You didn't listen." Detectives pressed harder. They dug into real estate records, cross-referenced names, unearthed connections to mob figures once considered untouchable. But with every revelation, walls rose higher. Files marked confidential. Doors slammed shut. Retired officials refused interviews. Some muttered warnings. Don't dig too deep. Still, the city had tasted blood. Journalists refused to back down. Night after night, news shows ran segments on Laura's story. Her face appeared on posters across boroughs. She had become a martyr of truth, a reminder that silence protects only the guilty. And yet, beneath the noise, the fear was real. Anonymous calls buzzed in newsrooms, distorted voices telling reporters to stop. Envelopes arrived with no return addresses, containing photographs from the 1980s, faces of men in suits gathered outside the Orchard Street warehouse. Some of those men were dead, but others were very much alive. It became clear Laura had touched a wire that still carried current. Her parents received threats too, late-night calls, silence on the other end, footsteps outside their home. Police placed them under watch, but the message was clear. The machine Laura uncovered had not vanished entirely. Pieces of it still lurked in the city's veins. And through it all, the haunting question persisted, why her? Why Laura? The answer formed slowly in detectives' minds. Because she was young, because she was curious, because she wrote things down, because she dialed a newsroom payphone when she should have walked away. She wasn't powerful, but she was dangerous enough because she saw. The unease thickened. The verdict had ended the trial, but it had opened something larger, a reckoning. On Orchard Street, the boutique owner complained that tourists stopped to photograph the spot where Laura was last seen. Candles and flowers piled against the glass. Across the city, murals multiplied, her eyes painted across brick walls, staring, unblinking. Poets wrote of her, Musicians dedicated songs. She had become myth, and myths cannot be silenced. But myths also demand truth. And the truth was this. The story wasn't finished. Cross was guilty, yes, but his words, "You're looking in the wrong place," still echoed. Laura's tape was not closure. It was a door opening wider. In the cold case office, detectives pinned her photo above the board, circled in red. Beside it, names, companies, addresses, all linked by string. The web grew larger by the day, some leads dead, others alive. And in the center of it all, one question pulsed like a wound. What exactly did Laura Bennett uncover? The city waited for answers, and the silence pressed heavier than ever. New York had heard Laura Bennett's voice, and it would not forget. The tape played on loop across television stations, radios, streaming feeds. If anything happens, Orchard Street, look there, look at the files. The words were a warning, a confession, and an accusation all at once. They carried the weight of a ghost speaking from beneath decades of silence, and the city listened. But with her words came fear. Reporters chasing the story began receiving anonymous calls, distorted voices, calm but cold. Stop digging, leave it buried. Others found envelopes slipped under their doors. Inside, photographs of their families taken without consent. One journalist discovered a dead rat left on his windshield, its body wrapped in newspaper clippings about the trial. These weren't idle threats. They were reminders that the shadows Laura uncovered still moved in the city, patient and watchful. The newsroom at the Times became a fortress. Security guards checked IDs at every entrance. Suspicious packages were quarantined, phones monitored. Yet inside, reporters were relentless. They believed Laura's death had been the cost of truth, and they refused to pay it again with silence. They traced the shell companies she had written about, the property transfers on Orchard Street, the men photographed outside the warehouse where her body had been found. Names emerged. One was a construction boss tied to mob unions in the 1980s, now long dead but once feared. Another was a businessman still alive, living quietly in Connecticut, his fortune built on real estate that once belonged to the Lower East Side. And one name, faded in Laura's journal margins, belonged to a retired city official, a man who had signed off on building permits when the neighborhood was under mob control. The pattern sharpened. Organized crime had been laundering money through Orchard Street properties, and Laura, barely 23, had stumbled into the trail. Detectives confirmed it. Financial records from 1984 and 1985 revealed sudden shifts. Warehouses purchased in cash, gutted, resold under new companies. The warehouse where Laura was buried had been part of it. She had been silenced in the very foundation of their scheme. And yet, the deeper the investigation went, the more resistance it met. Files vanished from archives. Requests for records were denied under lost or destroyed. Retired officials hung up on calls. Detectives were warned quietly by superiors. Don't push too hard. Some doors were closed for a reason. But the city didn't want closed doors anymore. Protests spread beyond Orchard Street. Crowds filled Union Square holding signs. Justice means truth. Laura spoke. Now we listen. Candlelight vigils turned into marches, thousands carrying her face on posters, chanting her name down Broadway. The movement grew. Laura became a symbol not just of one case, but of every unsolved mystery, every cold file collecting dust in precinct basements. The Bennetts, her parents, stood at the center. Frail, exhausted, but unwilling to stop, they joined the marches, walking with strangers who carried their daughter's photo. The father said into microphones, his voice cracked but steady. She was 23 years old. She wrote things down. She made phone calls. She warned you. And for nearly 40 years, no one listened. We are listening now. Their grief became a rallying cry. Inside his cell, Daniel Cross heard the chants outside, faint but real. Guards said he smirked when reporters shouted questions through bars. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he muttered phrases the guards couldn't make sense of. It wasn't mine to tell. I just followed orders. She found what she shouldn't have. His words leaked through court documents, and the press seized them. Followed orders. That phrase set the city on fire. If Cross had followed orders, then who had given them? If Laura had uncovered something bigger, then who had silenced her from above? Detectives returned to her notebooks. They re-examined every page, magnified every smudge. In one corner, barely visible, was a name, V. Romano. At first it seemed irrelevant, but digging revealed the name belonged to Vincent Romano, a mob enforcer active in the mid-1980s, feared for his brutality. He had vanished in 1986, presumed dead in a gang war, but rumors persisted he had fled under a new identity. Laura had written his name. That meant she had connected him to Orchard Street. That meant she had been closer than anyone realized. Reporters pounced on it. Romano connection to Bennett murder? Screamed the front page of the Daily News. Families of old mob victims came forward demanding answers. Politicians scrambled again, promising task forces, commissions, transparency. But whispers in the back rooms told another story, that the city didn't want the past fully opened. because the past implicated too many living hands. Still, the pressure grew. And then came the break. A box of files, thought lost, surfaced in the basement of an old precinct. Inside were surveillance photographs from 1985, part of an investigation into Romano's crew. One photo showed him standing outside the Orchard Street bar, the very bar where Laura made her final call. In the background, blurred but visible, was Laura herself, scarf around her neck, notebook in hand. The photograph froze investigators. She had been in his sight. He had been in hers. The photo leaked, hitting the front page like an explosion. Laura photographed with mob enforcer before death. The city reeled. The verdict against Cross suddenly looked smaller, narrower. He was guilty, yes, but he hadn't been alone. Cross's words echoed louder. "You're looking in the wrong place." The Bennetts broke down when shown the photo. Their daughter, captured unknowingly in the frame of her own death sentence. The mother said through tears, "She was right there, and nobody saved her." The photo reignited the movement. Protests swelled. Orchard Street was flooded nightly with candles, chants, songs. People scrawled graffiti across walls. Romano did it too. Who ordered it? But with every chant, the danger thickened. Reporters who pushed hardest found their cars vandalized, their inboxes flooded with threats. One was nearly run off the road late at night. Detectives themselves were warned. Anonymous notes slipped under doors reading only, "Stop digging." It was Laura's story repeating itself. A truth too dangerous, a silence enforced by fear. And yet silence had already been broken. Because now Laura Bennett wasn't just a victim in a cold case. She was a symbol of resistance, of a city demanding its buried truths. Her voice from the tape still echoed in radios and phones. "If anything happens, Orchard Street, look there." The city was looking, and the city would not stop. The photograph detonated like a bomb. A grainy black and white frame pulled from a forgotten box in a precinct basement. Laura Bennett, scarf knotted tight against the November wind, standing only feet away from Vincent Romano, the mob enforcer who had vanished like smoke in 1986. Her notebook clutched in her hand, his shadow looming in the same strip of film. Two lives colliding for an instant, preserved forever, proof that she had stepped directly into danger. The city reeled. Newspapers screamed the headline, "Laura caught in mob net before murder." Talk shows raged late into the night. Social media erupted with theories. Some swore Romano had ordered her silenced. Others argued he had carried it out himself. Still others whispered about politicians tied to his crew, names that never appeared in court but hovered in rumor like storm clouds. The cold case detectives stared at the photograph with unease. It was proof she had seen him, maybe even spoken to him. But it was also a reminder of how much they had missed. For nearly 4 decades, the picture had sat in a box while her parents begged for answers. Now it surfaced, too late to stop her death, but powerful enough to tear open the silence surrounding it. The Bennetts saw the photo on television before detectives could show them privately. The father's face drained of color. The mother clutched the frame of her daughter's portrait, whispering, "She was right there, right there." Their grief spilled across airwaves, raw and uncontainable, and the city, watching, felt it like a knife to the chest. But grief was not the only response. Fear returned. Reporters who covered Romano's name began receiving threats more vicious than before. One journalist opened his mailbox to find a single bullet inside an envelope. Another returned to her apartment to find her door forced open. Nothing stolen, but her notes scattered on the floor. A television anchor was warned on a live call-in show. "Keep talking about Romano, and you'll end up like her." The line went dead. The threats didn't silence, they amplified, because now the danger itself became proof that the story was real, that Romano's shadow still stretched across New York. Detectives worked in hushed tones. They traced Romano's associates, pulling names from the 1980s files. Some were dead, others imprisoned, but whispers suggested Romano himself might have survived. Rumors placed him in Florida, in Vegas, in South America. No proof, only smoke. But the possibility was enough to set the city on edge. If he lived, he had watched Laura's trial from afar. If he lived, he had heard her voice echo from the grave. If he lived, he knew his time was running out. And then an anonymous tip. A letter, typewritten, arrived at the precinct. No return address. Inside, a single line. Romano didn't die. Look under the name Salvatore Russo. Miami, 1993. Detectives scrambled, cross-referencing databases. Salvatore Russo, an alias connected to property purchases in Florida during the early 90s. The buyer's description matched Romano. He had lived under another name hidden in sunshine while Laura's bones lay in silence. The revelation was explosive. If true, it meant Laura had not only uncovered mob corruption, but had threatened men who remained alive and wealthy decades later. But verifying the tip proved dangerous. Detectives who made inquiries in Florida found themselves shadowed. Cars followed them on highways. Hotel rooms rifled through. Warnings whispered in parking garages. Drop it. Go home. Back in New York, the protests swelled. Orchard Street was a river of candles each night. Chants thundered against the boutiques and condos built over the ruins of the past. Truth for Laura! Romano's name! Her face, painted across murals, stared down from brick walls with unblinking eyes. The city was awake, and it was angry. Politicians faltered under the pressure. Some called for hearings into organized crime's lingering influence. Others urged calm, insisting the past should remain buried. But the public had made up its mind. Laura Bennett's ghost demanded more. Inside his cell, Daniel Cross learned of the photo. Guards said he slammed his fists against the bars, shouting, "See? I wasn't lying. I wasn't alone." For the first time since his arrest, emotion cracked his mask. His lawyer filed new motions, claiming the photograph proved Cross had been scapegoated, that others shared the guilt. The courts denied them, but the noise spilled outside, feeding the storm. The Bennetts, though grateful for the verdict, now found themselves caught in a darker current. At a press conference, the mother's voice broke. "We wanted closure, but now we see there may never be closure. There is only truth, and the truth is still out there." Her words lit the crowd. Detectives pushed on, despite threats, despite orders to slow. They obtained financial records of Salvatore Russo in Miami, real estate, restaurants, cash-only businesses, all classic mob fronts. And then, the final piece, a death certificate from 2005. Russo had died of a heart attack, cremated within days. No DNA samples, no fingerprints. Convenient, too convenient. Had Romano died quietly under a false name, escaping justice forever? Or had his death certificate been faked like his alias, allowing him to vanish again? The question twisted like a blade. Reporters smelled conspiracy. Romano's death, real or staged, screamed front pages. Families of his past victims demanded investigations. The mayor faced fury on live television when asked why so many files had disappeared. "How do we know Laura isn't just one of many silenced voices?" a reporter demanded. The mayor had no answer. The city boiled. One night, during a vigil on Orchard Street, a masked figure slipped into the crowd. He carried a sign like the others, but his message was different. "Romano lives." He placed it against the boutique window, lit a candle beneath it, and vanished into the night. The image spread across social media, chilling thousands. Was it a hoax or a warning? Detectives couldn't say. They only knew the fear was real as the whispers Laura had written in her journal. "He warned me." Now the city felt warned too, because the story wasn't ending. It was expanding, mutating, spiraling outward. One photograph had ripped the lid off a grave too shallow to contain the truth. Laura Bennett had vanished in 1985. Her body had been found in 2023. A man had been convicted. But still the streets whispered, the walls painted her eyes. The tape of her voice played over and over, refusing silence. And the deeper the city listened, the clearer the truth became. Daniel Cross may have pulled the trigger, or swung the fist, or dug the hole, but he had not acted alone. He had followed orders. The question, heavy as concrete, still pressed down. Whose orders? The city pulsed with unease, like a wound reopened and festering. The verdict against Daniel Cross had been celebrated as justice, but the photograph of Laura Bennett and Vincent Romano had poisoned the victory. New York was no longer asking if Cross was guilty, it was asking who else had blood on their hands. And the silence from those in power only made the whispers louder. Romano's name rolled across the headlines, his alleged alias, Salvatore Russo, his supposed death in 2005, his presence in surveillance photos that tied him to Laura's last night alive. Each new revelation fueled the fire. Protesters carried signs reading, "Cross wasn't alone. Where's Romano? Justice means truth." Vigils transformed into marches that blocked traffic across Manhattan bridges. Orchard Street was buried nightly under seas of candles, flowers, posters. The Bennetts stood at the heart of it. Their voices, fragile but unyielding, kept the crowd alive. The father, hollow-eyed, said on live television, "We buried our daughter, but we will not bury her truth." The mother's words cut even deeper. They silenced her once. They will not silence her again. Yet even as the city roared, fear stalked the edges. Reporters pressing hardest against Romano's past found themselves targeted. Cars vandalized, homes broken into. One investigative journalist was attacked outside his apartment, beaten until his jaw broke, his notes stolen. He survived, but his voice on crutches before cameras shook the city. They're still out there. They don't want Laura's story told. It was 1985 all over again. Threats, shadows, silence. Detectives pressed forward, chasing Romano's ghost. They followed the trail of Salvatore Russo, his Miami properties, his alleged death certificate. They interviewed old associates, men now gray and frail, who spoke only in whispers. One finally admitted, Romano wasn't the type to die in bed. If you ask me, he bought himself a new name, maybe more than one. The possibility chilled investigators. If Romano had faked one death, he could have faked another. He could be anywhere or nowhere. Alive or dead, his name still carried power. Meanwhile, the political fallout spread. Lawmakers called for hearings into the failures of 1985. Why had Laura's tape been buried? Why had photographs sat unseen for decades? Who had silenced leads when they mattered most? City Hall was forced to announce a commission, an independent review of cold cases linked to organized crime. But many doubted it would be more than theater. Too many officials from that era were still alive, still powerful, still unwilling to let their names be dragged through Laura's fire. Then came the leak. A cache of documents, delivered anonymously to a major news outlet, landed like a hammer. Dozens of pages of internal memos from the mid-1980s, stamped with city seals. They revealed orders to deprioritize Bennett disappearance and redirect resources from Orchard Street investigations. Names were blacked out, but context screamed corruption. Someone in power had pushed Laura's case aside deliberately. She hadn't just been forgotten, she had been erased. The city erupted. Crowds stormed City Hall steps, demanding resignations, demanding names. Who buried Laura? They shouted into the night. Politicians scrambled. Some distanced themselves, claiming ignorance. Others blamed the past. But the public didn't care. For them, Laura was no longer a single tragedy. She was proof of a system that had chosen silence over truth. And still, the shadow of Romano loomed. Anonymous tips poured in daily. Romano spotted in Argentina. Romano hiding in Vegas. Romano dead years ago. Body buried under another name. The rumors multiplied. Impossible to confirm, feeding the legend. Some claimed he had attended Laura's trial in disguise, sitting among reporters, watching quietly as Cross took the fall. Others said he had sent the very photograph that exposed him, a taunt to the city that never caught him. Truth blurred with paranoia. Daniel Cross, locked in his cell, became the unwilling oracle. Guards reported him muttering, "Romano gave the order, I just carried it out." Sometimes he screamed it, sometimes he whispered it. His lawyer tried to use it as leverage for appeal, but the courts dismissed it as the ramblings of a convicted man. Still, the words leaked to the press, and once again, the city split. Was Cross finally telling the truth, or was he clinging to a lie to spread chaos? The Bennetts refused to rest. They met with reporters, detectives, even lawmakers. Their message was relentless. Justice is not finished. Cross was one piece. There are others. Laura's voice will not fade. Their courage inspired thousands. Murals across boroughs multiplied, her eyes painted larger than ever, notebooks drawn in her hands. The words, "She knew," scrawled beside them. But courage has a price. One night, their home in Albany was vandalized. Windows shattered. On the wall, spray painted in red, "Stop digging." Police rushed in, but no arrests were made. The message was clear. The shadows that silenced Laura were still watching. Yet the Bennetts would not stop. They stood before cameras the next morning, the paint still drying behind them, and the mother said with fire in her voice, "If you think this will scare us, you never knew our daughter. She was brave. We will be too." Her words sparked another march in New York, the largest yet. Tens of thousands filled the streets, chanting Laura's name, demanding Romano's. Helicopters hovered overhead as rivers of people flooded downtown, their candles turning the night into a blazing sea of light. Detectives knew the pressure was boiling. The commission promised hearings, the press promised exposés, the public demanded names. But behind closed doors, the investigation into Romano stalled. Every lead ended in shadow. Files missing, witnesses dead, aliases untraceable. Still, one detail emerged. A man in Florida arrested in 1997 under the name Russo had given a fingerprint sample. That print was compared recently against old records. It matched Vincent Romano. Proof he had lived years beyond 1985. Proof he had worn another name. Proof Laura had been right. But the trail ended there. Russo's file ended in 2005 with a death certificate, cremated, no body, convenient, too convenient. The revelation rocked the city again. Romano lived, proof found. The story consumed every screen, every headline. If he had survived once, had he survived again? Was he alive now, watching the chaos unfold, smirking in the dark? The question haunted New York. Because if Romano lived, then Laura Bennett's story wasn't over. It was still happening. And if Romano lived, then silence wasn't victory, it was strategy. The city braced for what came next. New York waited the way a city waits for a storm, eyes on the horizon, breath held. The name Laura Bennett had been written on brick walls and in the backs of throats, a prayer, a warning, a promise. The verdict against Daniel Cross stood in the record books, neat and final. But nothing about this felt neat, nothing about it felt final. The photograph had cracked the story open, the alias had poured gasoline into the crack. The whispers that Vincent Romano lived somewhere under a new name turned the crack into a canyon. And then the city learned what it means when a canyon answers back. It began with a steel door in a forgotten storage unit under the FDR, leased in 1994 by a shell company that rented space to no one and received mail from nowhere. The flood mitigation crews were the ones who found it, workers in rubber boots and headlamps, clearing debris after an autumn storm swelled the river. Behind a rusting chain-link fence, past corroded pipes and a smell like wet copper, they discovered the unit. The lock had fused into itself, metal eaten by time. A bolt cutter sang once. The door gave. Inside, a coffin of dust and heat and paper, boxes stacked like bricks, ledger books tied with twine, Polaroids that had bled their color into the cardboard, a typewriter ribbon sealed in wax. On the floor, a metal locker with a number stenciled in white paint, 1985. The flood crew called it in. The precinct called the cold case unit. By nightfall, a swarm of gloves and flashlights moved through the unit while the river exhaled damp air against the pilings. Someone switched on a generator. Fluorescent light broke the dark. Dust turned to snow. The boxes were not random. Property deeds, Orchard Street, 1984. Wire transfers, Miami, 1993. Photographs, men in suits outside the same warehouse where Laura's bones had been found. A ledger page with payments to a Russo S, a copy of the death certificate stamped, cremated. And beneath the locker's lid, slid back with a cough of rust, a tape recorder wrapped in a cloth napkin from a defunct Lower East Side bar. Inside the recorder, a cassette already seated. On the label, cramped block letters, Orchard. They pressed play. Static, a chair scraping tile, a match striking, a man's voice sanded down by cigarettes, and God. Okay, this is protection. Insurance. You want it, you pay. You bury me, this digs me up. A second voice, younger, measured. Names. The older voice laughs, a sound without joy. Names cost extra. Paper rustles. The tape pops. Another voice enters. Flat, almost bored, the voice of someone who signs forms that close doors. You keep the docks quiet. We keep Orchard open. You get permits. We get our peace. It's not complicated. The old voice again. And if someone talks? Silence long enough to hear the river on the pilings. Then the flat voice, casual as weather. People disappear in this city every night. The generator hummed. The river knocked softly. The room around them, the dust, the paper, the breath of the past, felt like it leaned closer to listen to its own confession. The tape ran out. The light flickered. Someone swallowed hard. Someone else said too softly to be heard outside the headlamps. She heard this. Because tucked beside the recorder under the napkin lay a single page torn from a reporter's notebook. The rip was jagged but clean, like it had happened in a hurry. In neat, quick handwriting. Flat voice, permits, percentage. Older man, Romano, laughs. They say, if someone talks, people disappear. And beneath that, call times again tomorrow. Bring copies. The room breathed as one. Laura had been there, not in the flesh maybe, but close enough to catch the shape of the voices, close enough to write it down, close enough to understand exactly what she was stepping into. The unit became a crime scene, then a newsroom, then a storm. Boxes rolled out under tarps into waiting vans. The commission demanded jurisdiction. The DA demanded custody. The press demanded daylight. Lawyers sharpened. Politicians rehearsed regret. And in the middle of it all, the cold case detectives, backs bent by the weight of what they had found, kept moving pages from one table to another, assembling a skeleton from old paper and dead air. By morning, headlines detonated. Secret cash links mob, permits, and Orchard Street network. Tape suggests high-level collusion in 1985. A city that had lived with rumor now feasted on proof. The words from the tape seeped into radio morning shows, into taxi cabs, into classrooms. People mouthed them in elevators. People disappear in this city every night. The sentence moved through New York like a draft under a door. You couldn't see it, but you felt it on the back of your neck. In Albany, the Bennetts watched with their hands clasped so tight the knuckles went white. The mother held the torn page under a plastic sheet like a relic. The father whispered, "She wrote this. She wrote this." The reporter's line, "Call times again tomorrow," stabbed daylight through the fog. She had been going back the next day. She never got the chance. Cameras stamped footprints into the pavement outside the FDR while trucks idled, satellite dishes opening like white flowers toward the sky. City Hall went on defense. Names remained under blackout bars on the memos, but the outline of the collusion was visible enough to terrify. Permits traded like chips, patrols redirected, tipsters turned into ghosts. Orchard Street was never just real estate, it was an engine. Money went in dirty and came out clean, and anyone who smudged the gears got pulled into the teeth. Inside Rikers, word reached Daniel Cross. A guard said he laughed again, that same empty laugh, then slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, elbows on knees, face in his hands. When he spoke, he didn't shout, he didn't smirk. He said it soft, almost like a prayer. She was right there the whole time. The commission called an emergency hearing. The chamber filled with microphones and heat. A procession of former officials raised their right hands and their left eyebrows, disclaiming memory, dismissing tapes as context-free, questioning chain of custody, suggesting doctoring, hinting at political theater. The city listened, unimpressed. The tape didn't care about their posture. It played the same way every time, cruel and calm. Reporters filed stories faster than the presses could swallow. One name finally leaked, a deputy commissioner from the 1980s who had retired to a consulting firm with a skyline view. He vanished from his penthouse the same day, lawyers speaking in his absence about health concerns, about slander. Another name surfaced, then sank beneath denial. The hearing turned into a game of fingers pointing at mirrors. The cold case detectives did something else. They drove to Orchard Street. No cameras, no microphones, just two people in plain suits who had lived with Laura long enough to think of her as a daughter they had never met. They stood in the boutique's doorway where the bar used to be. Through the glass, mannequins stared past them at a world that had forgotten to blink. On the sidewalk, wax puddles formed where candles had burned low and been left to collapse. A storm drain wore paper petals from flyers turned to pulp by rain. One detective closed their eyes and tried to hear the jukebox. The other tried to hear the click of a payphone receiver. They both heard the line cut short. The city churned. The tape ricocheted through neighborhoods like a ricochet always does, loudest where the walls are closest. In the Bronx, an old man paused his chess game, hand hovering above a rook, and said softly to no one, "They told us we made up the stories." In Queens, a woman wrote a name she hadn't spoken in 20 years on a scrap of paper and slid it under a church door. In Brooklyn, a barback listened to the radio and wondered how many times he had dried glasses while a promise was being broken on the street outside. At night, the vigil on Orchard Street swelled again. Thousands, 10,000, a braid of grief and fury, long enough to wrap the block. Musicians played a slow march nobody had practiced and everybody knew. Someone carried a frame built from 2x4s with a cotton sheet stretched across it, the outline of a phone booth painted in black. People took turns standing inside the painted rectangle, holding a receiver that wasn't there, speaking into silence that had finally learned to answer. The Bennetts walked through the crowd like a needle through cloth, sewing the city together as they passed. The mother climbed a milk crate and lifted the torn page in its sleeve. A hush fell that sounded like snow. "She wrote this on the night before," the mother said, voice steady as a metronome. "She told you to look here. We are looking. Don't stop." The crowd answered without words. Thousands of hands rose, fingers curled as if holding pens that had run out of ink. For a moment, the street looked like a field of reeds and wind. The storm broke in a way storms do in cities, not with lightning, but with paper. Indictments, subpoenas, warrants for records thought lost. A judge signed an order unsealing a case that had slept since Reagan. A federal grand jury convened. For the first time, the city's machinery turned toward its own shadow with teeth instead of gloves. And still no Romano, no body, no face, no knock at a door with a badge in the peephole camera. He was everywhere in the archives and nowhere on the sidewalk. He was a signature in Miami, a whisper in a locker, a laugh on a tape that did not laugh. He was the outline drawn around power when power wants to pretend it has no shape. On a Tuesday, the color of old nickels, a reporter received a package with no return address. Inside, a set of photographs printed on cheap paper. A man in a baseball cap buying coffee in a coastal town 2 states south. A profile like a memory, a scar like a rumor. On the back of the last photo, a single word written with a broad, impatient pen, running. By the time the images hit the wire, the man in the cap was gone, the coffee cup still warm beside a trash can with a liner torn from the weight of other people's mornings. The city, which loves a chase as much as it hates a mirror, surged. Tips flooded hotlines. Every man with a scar became a suspect. Every camera became a net. The cold case unit triaged until their eyes blurred. The commission unfurled maps. The DA's office practiced announcements they could not yet make. And then something quieter happened. At a small cemetery upstate, under a sky that had forgotten how to be blue without effort, Laura Bennett was reburied, not because the law required it, but because the family did. The first funeral had been for bones found in concrete. This one was for a voice found in a locker. The gravestone was simple. A chisel had added an inscription. "She called, we answered." Detectives came in plain clothes. Reporters stayed away. A pastor spoke without his book. The wind moved through maple leaves that had decided to let go without being asked. The mother ran her palm across the stone and said almost conversationally, "We heard you." The father tucked the torn page away and said to the ground, "We will keep hearing you." On the way back to the city, the train passed neighborhoods Laura had noticed in her notebooks, corners where light leaned strangely, blocks where sidewalks told you what shoes walked them, windows where the same plant had refused to die for years. People got on, people got off, everyone carried a phone. The conductor called out stations like a liturgy. Somewhere under the Hudson, it occurred to one detective that the city might be the witness that could not be intimidated. You can threaten a person, you can threaten 3 people, but you cannot threaten 8 million who have decided, briefly and miraculously, to listen together. Night fell. New York did what it always does under night, confessed and lied and fed and slept and watched and waited and promised. In a cell on Rikers, Daniel Cross dragged a palm across the cold floor and stared at the blank underside of his bunk as if words might grow there. In a coastal town 2 states south, a man in a baseball cap checked his rearview mirror and turned left without signaling. In a brownstone where a name had once been signed to a permit like a weapon, a retired official stared at his television on mute and could not remember the last time his hands had been steady. Laura's tape played again, not on radios now, but in rooms where decisions are made when nobody's supposed to be looking. If anything happens, Orchard Street, look there. Look at the files. Her voice had learned to haunt where it mattered. And Orchard Street, which had learned to sell candles and linens and small plates on reclaimed wood, kept learning another trade, how to hold a vigil without burning down. Night after night, the block filled and emptied, breathing like a lung. Children who hadn't been born when